Plants, Pests and Pathogens. I am Caroline Richardson, Program Assistant with the Master Gardener program. And today we are so pleased to have a guest speaker, Dr. Kelly Oten, will talk to us about invasive tree pests of North Carolina and give us an update on spotted lanternfly. We will continue on after that with our BOLOs. This morning we have Matt Bertone live, but this morning we have Mike Munster and a pre-recorded message he has and other commitments. So it's actually working out that we can be flexible like that. And then Charlotte will finish us up with a Plant These Instead feature. This morning we're going to talk about cultivars of basil that are more resistant to basal downy mildew. And lastly, a few announcements. All right, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Kelly Oten, and she is an assistant professor and extension specialist in forest health here at NC State in the Department of Forestry and Environmental Resources. Kelly has shared with us that she's always loved insects, and that is definitely proved by her 3 degrees in entomology. Her bachelor's degree from Texas A&M, her master's from the University of Tennessee, and her PhD here from NC State. After graduating, she worked for 8 years with the Forest Health Program of the NC Forest Service before joining the faculty and Extension Forestry team at NC State in 2020. She works primarily on invasive forest pests and what we can do to manage them. When she is not chasing insects, she enjoys traveling and cooking, doing do-it-yourself projects, and convincing her 2 young girls that insects are cool. So we thank you, Kelly, for joining us and sharing your knowledge and your update with us this morning. I will let you.
All right, thank you so much for that introduction. Like she said, I do have 2 young girls. One of them loves bugs and one of them who's afraid of butterflies. So I'm trying my hardest to be that entomologist that makes them grow up loving insects. So let me share my screen real quick. Can y'all see that okay?
That looks great.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for the introduction. Today I'm going to talk about invasive tree pests, these things that we've been dealing with in North Carolina, some things that we already have and you've probably heard about and know about, give you updates on those, changes in programs for those, and also changes in ranges. Unfortunately, they do move around a lot. That's the name of the game for invasives. But then I'm going to give you 2 new invasives that we are on the lookout for and we're very concerned about. So let's get started. You know, anytime I talk about invasive species, it can be sometimes overwhelming. It seems like we're getting more and more, and we are. Invasive species are a byproduct of our global trade. The more and more that we trade products, you can see in this top left graph here, since the 1950s and 1970s, our imports have skyrocketed. So the more things that we bring in, the higher the risk is of us also accidentally importing these unwanted pests as well. How do they get here? Well, when I'm working with forest insects, a lot of these are wood-boring insects or live in or on wood. So if you know anything about global trade, you're probably aware that wood pallets, wood crates, packaging material, a lot of those are made out of wood. So if they're made out of wood in their home range, and there happens to be a wood-boring insect in there, and that wood pallet is not treated appropriately, they are supposed to be chemically or heat treated before being transported now, then we could accidentally get new species. And this bottom left picture, or the bottom right picture, was actually the very first incident of an intercepted accidental introduction. This was the first shipment of cherry blossoms from Japan that were shipped to Washington, D.C. Now, these weren't obviously wood pallets, but another product that is shipped around are nursery products. And insects can be in or on the soil, the plant itself, and that's another way that they get around. Homunculus delgid is a really good example of an insect that was accidentally imported on an infested plant. So back to this picture, this was the first shipment of cherry blossoms from Japan back in the early 1900s. And when they arrived, they were found to be infested with insects, with nematodes, And it was concerning to agriculture and forest ecosystems around the location. And so the decision was made to burn all of the cherry blossoms. And that's what that picture is depicting right there. Now that might seem like a pretty significant response, but we need to have a significant response in order to protect our natural resources and our trees in the US. And obviously you can see that if you've ever been to the cherry blossoms, let me hide. If you've ever seen the cherry blossoms in Washington, D.C., you know that a second shipment actually did come through and is successfully thriving there. And a lot of people enjoy going there, and usually in April when they're at their peak bloom. So the first update I'm going to give y'all today is actually the oldest invasive forest pest that we're dealing with here in North Carolina. This is the spongy moth. Now, spongy moth recently went through a name change. This is the Lymantria dispar, which was previously called gypsy moth. The name was changed because it was found to be derogatory to the Romani people, and spongy moth aligns the new common name with the common name in Canada and in France. So it makes sense, and now we're all on the same page when we talk about this caterpillar. Right now, the quarantine for spongy moth is primarily in Virginia. We do have a quarantine in the northeastern part of North Carolina, Currituck and part of Dare County. However, that quarantine was established in the late 1980s, and we haven't had to add any quarantine since. So that's actually a really successful program. Now, what you'll notice here is that the quarantine stops right there at the state line. If we were in person, this is when I would usually ask, why do you think that is? Some people would respond, well, maybe we're not looking for it. And the fact is, we set almost 20,000 traps every year in the state looking for it. Some people think maybe it's too warm here. That's not the case either. Basically what happened, this invasive has been here for so long. It was originally introduced near the Boston area. By the time it spread, it was getting to North Carolina. Research had caught up, and suddenly we had multiple tools in the toolbox to be able to combat this pest. So as it was approaching the state line, and the straight line is a very defensible line, we are now implementing these tools through a very rigorous program here in North Carolina. This is what the spongy moth looks like, very hairy, but also very vibrant when it's in person. It has 5 pairs of blue dots, followed by 6 pairs of red dots, and they are very, very hungry caterpillars. This is what they can do in some forest ecosystems, cause massive areas of defoliation. I've never been in a spongy moth outbreak, but I've heard reports that you're standing in it and it sounds like it's raining because there's so many caterpillars and they're just pooping all the time. I've also heard of roads getting slick because of these caterpillars and their frass are dropping on roadsides. So it can be very damaging, not only to the trees, but to the people who have to live in an area where there is an outbreak. Now, this is a map showing the trap captures from 2020. There is not a map of 2021. I will share those results though. But the reason why I'm sharing this is because you can see that there's clusters usually along this state line. Now, when we get a trap capture, if it's just one, usually that doesn't mean a lot. Male moths are the only one that flies. Females do not fly. They do have wings, but usually they're too rabid and they're unable to fly. So we set these traps. They're baited with a sex pheromone and it lures the male moths in. Now, male moths, because they're flying, they can, get in a wind event, a storm event. Just one detection of a male moth usually means nothing, but you'll see that there's these orange spots indicating that 4 to 9 moths were caught in a trap. And then these red where more than 10 male moths were caught in a trap. So that indicates that there is probably and maybe a reproducing population here. So essentially, with this program, we're looking at where these infestations are flaring up across the state line and treating that like a fire line and trying to put those traps out. So based on the 2021 traps, I did not have a map of this, but there were over 17,000 traps set across the state, and we caught just over 2,000 male moths in 725 of those traps. Now, that might sound like a lot, and it is double what was caught in 2020. But it is still an amount, and where the populations were flaring up are still areas that we can treat. So based on those trap results in 2021 and overwintering surveys looking for evidence of that population, usually that's egg mass surveys. These are the proposed treatments that should be occurring in June of this year. So you can see all along the state line, all of those dots are where infestations will, or where treatments will occur. Now this one out here in the Outer Banks, that's in Buxton. We've been battling that population for a while now, but I will say it is declining. We used to have to use a virus, one of the tools in the toolbox for when populations are very huge. And now we've been able to downgrade to mating disruption, which is more appropriate for more medium-sized populations. So across the state this year, there will be 11 treatment blocks, totaling 17,000 acres total between all of these blocks. And all of these will be mating disruption. And what that means is there will be an airplane flying over these blocks, and they will be spraying this foam. And this foam has the synthetic version of the sex pheromone of the moth. So basically you inundate the area with the sex pheromone. And when you do that, the males and females can't find each other. And if they cannot find each other, then they cannot mate. And then there's no young caterpillars to follow the spoon. So really effective method. Because it's a pheromone, it is species specific. So it doesn't impact humans or pets or even other insects. So very cool. And if you're interested in looking where exactly all of these blocks are, you can go to NCDA and CS's program page. And this map that I have a screenshot of is actually an interactive map. And you can scroll in and look very closely where the boundaries of each one of those treatment spots are. The next update I'm going to give is laurel wilts. This is one we've been battling in North Carolina. Well, I don't want to say battling. There's not much of a battle going on. We've been observing since 2011 when it was first found in Kelly, North Carolina, in the southeastern part of the state. This is a disease caused by a fungal pathogen, and the fungal pathogen is vectored by this beetle, the red bay ambrosia beetle. You can see a picture of it. They're very small ambrosia beetle. We have lots of ambrosia beetles in North Carolina, some of them native, some of them exotic. However, this is very problematic because it attacks healthy trees, and the fungus that it inoculates the trees with does cause disease in the red bay and sassafras that it infests. So very problematic, does not act the same way as most ambrosia beetles where they attack stressed or weakened trees, and they are just spreading up the coast. So far this year, 3 new counties have been identified. Every time there's a new county, a sample is sent to the PDIC, and that is confirmed. So as of right now, we have 17 counties in North Carolina that are positive for laurel wilt. Now, for a while, the only host that we had in North Carolina was red bay. I believe it was in 2018, several years ago, that we found it in sassafras for the first time. And it is worth noting that there is no quarantine for this invasive pest, and there's really no treatment option either. So here's a map showing where laurel wilts can be found so far. This is a little bit outdated. I mean, it's earlier this year, but we did have one more county in North Carolina added to this map. But what you'll notice is that there's a lot of pockets of these infestations. You can see here, like near the Atlanta area, up here in Tennessee and Kentucky, that really shocked everyone when that popped up on sassafras in 2019. And when that happened, they had determined that it had probably been there for several years before it was reported. And then, of course, you have this pop up over here in Texas. This thing is just spreading very easily. How did it get to those isolated places? Probably infested material, whether it was infested red bay or infested sassafras that was moved around. This is what it looks like when red bay is impacted. You see the wilting of the leaves, hence laurel wilt disease. I'll show the vascular streaking that is very characteristic of this disease on the next page. But what you'll notice is the hue on this, and the leaves or the tree retains their leaves for quite a period of time, sometimes up to 2 years. So this actually is really helpful when it comes to surveys, because we can look for these red bay trees that are holding on to their dead leaves. This is what it looks like in sassafras. They will eventually wilt all the way, but a lot of people basically report that it looks like sassafras is turning its fall colors, but not in the fall of the year. This is the vascular streaking. On the right here, you can see you cut into just under the bark, and those dark streaking are evidence of the disease. Now, that's the material that we usually chip away and then send to the PPP for confirmation. So what can be done for laurel wilt management? Nothing really. I already alluded to this already. Part of it is because Red bay and sassafras are just low value trees. Not a lot of people want to protect them. They're not high value timber products. They do serve a very important role in ecosystems. They serve as a food source for Palamedes swallowtail larvae. But unfortunately, there's just not a tool out there that will help protect trees and then our native ecosystems long-term from this disease. It changes a little bit when you get to Florida. There is a very economically valuable laurel species there, and that is the avocado trees. And they can be infested with red bay ambrosia beetle and other ambrosia beetles. Turns out when laurel wilt was introduced, the fungus that causes laurel wilt was also picked up by other species. So I think there are up to 16 or 17 species of ambrosia beetles are now vectoring this pathogen from tree to tree. But in these avocado groves in southern Florida, what they do is they first use a drone, they use spectral imagery to look for trees that are stressed, and then they bring in these dogs to the groves. And those dogs are trained to sniff out the fungus, and they're really good at it. They can actually detect this fungus 2 to 3 weeks before symptoms appear on the tree. And when that happens, if you catch it early, because tree death occurs very quickly, usually in 3 to 4 weeks, if you can catch it early, then they can treat those trees with a fungicide and protect those trees. Now, they do have to continually treat them. Usually it's anywhere from half a year to a year and a half retreatment, but very cool system for keeping those avocado groves alive and well so that we can continue to enjoy our guacamole. All right, quick update on emerald ash borer as well. This is probably the insect that I've spent the most of my time on ever since we found it in Granville County in 2013. This is a wood-boring beetle of ash trees and white fringe tree. We have only had one report of emerald ash borer on white fringe tree in North Carolina. However, I suspect that as the ash disappear because of this huge mortality wave being caused by this beetle, we will likely see more and more white fringe tree infested with this beetle. Now, I will say, usually this does not result in death of white fringe tree in areas where white fringe tree is becoming infested in Ohio, in other parts of the Midwest. They're seeing it's a multi-stem tree. They're seeing stems die back, and maybe it doesn't bloom as well, but often it's not mortality inducing. And we now have it in 64 counties in North Carolina. This is a map. It's a few months out of date, and the reason why it is the Forest Health Monitoring Coordinator position, which I previously held, is currently vacant. So they're working to get someone in there to be the updater of all of these maps. Now, previously, there was a quarantine associated with emerald ash borer. However, that quarantine was lifted last year. So now there is no quarantine associated with it. Ash material can move freely within the state and within the United States. So what is this insect doing? Well, it's really causing a lot of devastation to our ash populations and forest settings. This is actually in Virginia, just over the state line. You can see all of those gray or white trees. Those are all dead green ash trees along the Stanton River in Virginia. This is a stand just outside of Raleigh, North Carolina. This was taken during the summertime. You can see in the foreground some ash leaves. These trees should be alive and well, but the emerald ash borer came through here and caused an amazing amount of devastation. So what can we do about it? Well, we can use insecticides. The pros for that is it's very effective. We don't always have an effective insecticide available for invasives, but we do for emerald ash borer. The cons are that it's short-term and it's costly. This is an image showing on the left here, this tree was treated with insecticides where the trees on the right were not. So you can obviously see that it did offer protection. Now there are lots of insecticides available. However, these are the two most commonly used insecticides for emerald ash borer. Now the most effective is emamectin benzoate, and this is usually administered by a stem injection, whether it be an ArborJet IV-like system or these ChemJet system that you see in the photo here. But getting emamectin benzoate into the tree, and then the tree, it's a systemic insecticide, the tree takes it up and disperses it throughout the canopy. Now, emerald ash borer does feed on those transportation tissues. So if it is a heavily infested tree, it may not be dispersing the canopy that you like. So it's important that a tree be treated early. The cons of this method is that special equipment is needed. Some of the emamectin benzoate formulations are restricted use. Some of them are general use, but either way, you would still need those injection equipment available and know how to use them. If you call a tree care company and did it, it can also be very costly. We're seeing about $10 to $15 per inch DBH in North Carolina. And even though it's the most effective, you do have to reapply that every 2 to 3 years to maintain protection of the tree. Another method that is used often is imidacloprid or dinotefuran. This is another systemic insecticide. It is much more cost effective, but it is not as effective against emerald ash borer. They see very variable results in research. Sometimes they see really good control, and sometimes they see almost zero control. This probably is also linked to the amount of those transportation tissues that have been consumed by the emerald ash borer, because the tree does need to take it up within the canopy for it to be effective. Now, this one has to be reapplied annually if this is what a homeowner decides to do. And another big con is that it's a neonicotinoid. Both of these are neonicotinoids. And what do we know about neonicotinoids? They're harmful to pollinators. So even though ash is not visited by pollinators, there's a lot of understory plants. There's a lot of people who may be careless with them. There is a proposed Pollinator Protection Act. These were proposed years ago in both the North Carolina House and Senate, but the buzz has kind of died down for now. I think there is something that distracted everyone in 2020, but there is all of the expectations that this will likely pass. And if it does pass, it would make neonicotinoids a restricted use pesticide. So suddenly this method of treating trees that we recommend to people to use wisely, judiciously, but also a more affordable way, suddenly that would be off the table for most people. How long will we have to treat trees if this is the method that you decide to go? Well, unfortunately, forever. There was an instance in the Midwest where the emerald ash borer has been for years and years, and someone was treating their trees for 15 years, I believe, and they were finally like, all the ash trees are dead around me. Can I stop treating my tree? They were having an emamectin benzoate injection every 2 to 3 years. And they're like, I'm going to stop treating my tree. There should be no more emerald ash borer in the environment around me. So they stopped treating their tree, and lo and behold, it got infested and it died. The reason for that is, even though we see a big invasion wave coming through, we fully expect the emerald ash borer to linger around in small numbers as understory trees get large enough to be infested, as protected trees come out of protection if someone just decides to stop investing that on their trees. Is a long term from now? We're probably decades away from being able to say that maybe you can take your tree out of protection. So for the Sandlot fans out there, there's my forever tip for you guys. Another management tactic that is being looked into is biological control. The idea of this is sustainable and it can be very effective. This is usually going to be more appropriate for a forest setting, but we're looking for a long-term management here where parasitoids or predators can help keep populations low enough where they don't kill trees. Now, the cons of this are that it can take a very long time to actually start working and to establish parasitoids. We've been seeing obstacles in the South because the life cycle of emerald ash borer in the South is different from that in the Midwest and Northeast. So when some of these parasitoids are coming out and looking for emerald ash borer to feed on or to lay their eggs in, there's not the suitable life stage available for them, unfortunately. Public optics, that could be a pro and a con maybe. A lot of people do like biological control, but then you tell them it's non-native and there are concerns surrounding that. And then people who aren't aware what parasitoid wasps are, you tell them you're releasing thousands of wasps and they immediately freak out and thinking they're paper wasps or something. Another significant con is that it's very costly. It's taking a lot of research, it takes a lot of development, and it takes a lot of time. The estimated cost per parasitoid is about $2 to $3 right now. Eventually, if it becomes effective, hopefully that'll come down, but this is a very long-term and costly thing. This is a map showing where parasitoids have been released in North Carolina. Another obstacle we have is that trees just die very quickly. They usually die in 3 to 5 years after infestation. And we just don't see that with other trees where we're trying to make biological control successful. But the good news is that we are seeing establishment and we are seeing reduced emerald ash borer populations where those established, where those parasitoids are becoming established. So hopefully this becomes successful in the South. We're lagging behind simply because the emerald ash borer wasn't introduced until years later, but hopefully the progress they made in the Midwest and Northeast can also translate to success here in the South at some point. Another thing that we are looking into is post-plant resistance. Now, this would be ideal, right? If we can just plant a tree and it's not impacted by emerald ash borer. And that's what happens in the native range. Their Manchurian ash, for example, can get infested, but it's really very resistant to the emerald ash borer. So if we were able to identify or breed a tree or genetically modify a tree that was resistant to emerald ash borer, then we could plant them out there and we don't need chemicals, we don't need biological control. However, most likely it will probably be an IPM approach where we integrate all of these together for successful management. Now, the pros of host plant resistance are that it's sustainable. You have a resistant tree and you can put it out there. You don't have to worry about it too much. It can be hopefully very effective. The cons, it takes a really long time and it can be very challenging. There is a phenomenon, though, that is noticed in areas where the emerald ash borer invasion wave has already died down. This is lingering ash. And we are just now getting to the point in North Carolina where we're starting to see lingering ash ourselves in North Carolina. So this has been documented by the U.S. Forest Service and other people in the Midwest and Northeast, and we are starting to see it here. This is a stand in Garner, North Carolina. There's 32,000 ash trees at this site. They're all native green ash trees collected, seed in North Carolina. But you can see the range and health of those canopies. Now, a lot of them are dead now, but we have 160 trees. That's right, 160 trees out of those 32,000 that have very good looking canopies and that we're tracking over several years. Another thing that municipalities and homeowners are deciding to do is just tree removal. Because ash tree is a really prominent in urban landscapes, sometimes it doesn't look so great. This is in Rochester, New York. All of these trees are ash trees that were infested with emerald ash borer, and they came through and removed all of them. So it doesn't look good, but it also serves as another lesson to replant with diverse species. So if something comes through and attacks only one genus, which is very common for a lot of these invasives, then we might have some trees still left if they come through and wipe out an entire genus. So it's sad to see, but hopefully there's a lesson in there. We've already learned it once before with Dutch elm disease coming through and destroying elm trees. All right, the next two species I'm going to talk about, the next two invasives, actually aren't here in North Carolina yet. There are two insects on our doorstep, and I want to share with you guys because we are very interested in detecting them very quickly, because if we know about the population sooner, then we're much better able to respond to them. So the first one is the Asian longhorn beetle. Now, we've had this in the US since 1996. The first detection was in New York. It moved around in the Northeast. The closest detection since 2010 was in Ohio. And frankly, it's kind of died down. People stopped talking about it. Here in the South, we were like, wow, maybe it just won't get here in the South. Well, all of those dreams died away in 2020 when it was detected just outside of Charleston in Hollywood, South Carolina for the first time. Right now, there's just over a 70 square mile quarantine zone. You can see in this image here where Charleston is, and that red line shows the quarantine zone. They found just under 6,000 trees infested at this point, 3,500 of which have been removed, and that was as of earlier this month. Now, when it was found, it was determined, they looked at a lot of the infested trees. They're able to age how old these exit holes are. And it has been in that area for at least 7 years before it was detected. Now, someone found this beetle. You see on the next slide, this is a very big, beautiful beetle. Someone found it on their front porch. It was attracted to a light. This woman took a picture of it and she sent it to her son. And she was like, look at this beautiful beetle I saw. Well, her son just so happened to be an entomologist. And he said, whoa, mom, you need to report that. And she did. And when she reported it, APHIS descended upon the area. There's a very large USDA APHIS program surrounding this insect. It is a federally regulated species. They descended upon the area, started talking to homeowners and said, hey, you're probably going to see us around. You're probably going to lose some trees as we remove the hosts of this invasive species. And they were showing pictures and people being like, oh, I've seen that bug. That's been at we call that the pool bug. We've seen it out of the pool for the last 2 years and just no one knew to report it. So that's why we're trying to spread the word in North Carolina. We're using a lot of outreach. We have a program called Poolside Pests, and that we're trying to spread the word to not just pool owners who may see these in their pools or around their pools, but also just all North Carolinians. We have magnets and stickers that we're giving out at a lot of events. And since pool season is about to start with Memorial Day coming up, we're really going to push that in the coming weeks. So hopefully you see that. And if you do programming in your own county and want to use the Poolside Pests swag or stickers or anything, let me know and I can get you some of those materials. Now, what damage does this insect cause? Well, this is a wood boring insect. You can see right here, this is a cross section of the galleries that the wood borer makes. It basically turns that wood into Swiss cheese. As that happens, the tree loses its structural integrity. So the tree basically falls apart. This is the understory of infested trees. You can see large limbs, tops falling out. The tree just basically crumbles and over time it will die. This is what the egg niche of the Asian longhorn beetle looks like. The female chews a little divot into the bark of a tree and then lays an egg in that divot. When that egg hatches, the first larva or the first instar bores deeper into the wood and starts feeding under the bark. And then as it grows, it turns into the wood and that causes those large galleries that I just showed you. Now, this is the exit hole right here. It's nearly perfectly round. And it's about the size of the diameter of a pencil. We are seeing them a little bit larger as well. I've used a Sharpie and done the same test, but the pencil test is a very famous test. Put a pencil into it, and if you see a maple tree declining or a host tree declining in health, primarily they're infesting maples, but they will also attack ash, willow, elm, things like that. Then it's something to be concerned about. Another thing you might see is sawdust or shavings coming out of the tree due to larval feeding. This will come out of the holes, but it will also accumulate at the base of the tree or in branch unions where one branch comes into a larger branch. Now, right now, I mentioned the APHIS program that is very large and rigorous and basically trying to eradicate the beetle. The focus of this program is not management. It is not slow the spread like it is with spongy moth. It is eradication. They want to completely get this beetle out of these areas in which it's found. And to do that, they do host removal. So here's another before picture, followed by an after picture, and yet another lesson about diversifying your urban canopy so that this doesn't happen. Now, it doesn't look pretty. It doesn't look good when APHIS comes in and does complete host removal of Asian longhorn beetle hosts. However, it works. It works. All of those green dots on that map are where infestations previously were and have been declared eradicated. To declare it eradicated, they have to do surveys for 3 consecutive years and not find any infested hosts or any sign of the beetle itself. So you can see that Chicago area, they were able to eradicate this beetle in all of that, in that entire Chicago area infestation. Now, those areas in red, they're still working on eradication. That doesn't mean they haven't been successful there. It just means they haven't been successful there yet. And it is hopefully coming because the program is so strong. But you can also see exactly where the range of Asian longhorn beetle previously was before this Hollywood, South Carolina detection in 2020. Now, another thing you'll notice is that North Carolina is right between Ohio and South Carolina. And unfortunately, the population genetics of the South Carolina population does match that of the Ohio population. So if it was an accidental transportation in firewood or woody material, then most likely they drove through North Carolina to get there. So very important to keep our eyes out. Hopefully if it is here, we catch it before it's been 7 years and infesting over 6,000 trees. Now, another thing to notice is that South Carolina is not New York or Chicago or even Ohio. Previously, Asian longhorn beetle was in upland and urban areas. However, in South Carolina, that all changed. It can be found in swamps. This is a site in South Carolina. You can see me ducking behind a tree. My graduate student, Abby Ratcliffe, is behind me there. You cannot get large equipment into swamps like this. You cannot get equipment in to take down trees and chip them on site, which is what's usually done to urban trees. So we are doing some research to try to look at other ways to manage and remove those hosts and make them unsuitable for development in the forest setting. So Abby's project is looking at hacking and squirting trees, which is applying an herbicide, killing the tree standing. Or can we just cut the tree and leave it on the ground, and does it decompose fast enough to make it a non-attractive host and to stop ALB development if there were ALB or Asian longhorn beetles within that host? So we just collected our last round of data 2 weeks ago. All of her larvae are being genetically analyzed just to make sure they are Asian longhorn beetles, since they look a lot like some other longhorn beetles we have in the area. And results are to be determined. To report it in North Carolina, you can email badbug@mchr.gov or give me a call or go to our Poolside Pests website that I mentioned. And there is a button there where you can report it on the website. Now, the last insect I'm going to talk about was already alluded to, spotted lanternfly. Now, it gained a lot of popularity late last year because you can see in this map here, it was found about 15 miles from the state line last fall. Very troubling. Obviously, that is a big range jump. And the fact that it's so close to our state line really just enforces the mentality that it's probably just a matter of time until spotted lanternfly is in North Carolina. Now, this is what this insect looks like as a nymph. It's black with white spots. The last instar, it has red coloration as well. A lot of people think it looks like a tick. It's very leggy. It is not a tick though. It is a plant hopper. It uses piercing, sucking mouth parts to feed on the sap within a tree. Now, a lot of times you'll see pictures of spotted lanternfly with its wings spread like that. And when people look at it, they're like, oh, wow, that's a beautiful moth. But it is not a moth. When it's at rest, it looks more like a cicada. And those bright red wings that a lot of people think of are actually concealed. So I'd like to show this photo with the wings covered over the back, because that's more likely what you'll see. You usually see the red if they're dead, or if they're flying, you might see that flash of red as well. So what's so bad about spotted lanternfly? Well, they have a very wide host range. More than 100 hosts have been identified worldwide. In North Carolina, Tree of Heaven, or in the US, Tree of Heaven is their preferred host. It is native to their native range in Asia, where spotted lanternfly is native, but there's also a lot of other hosts that spotted lanternfly will attack in North Carolina. Chief among those, as far as concerning, are grapes. We have a lot of vineyards, we have a lot of grape or winemakers here in North Carolina. When spotted lanternfly is found and introduced, it will be very problematic for those grape growers and winemakers. And part of the reason for that is they see a huge reduction in crop production when spotted lanternfly is infesting grapevine. Sometimes they kill vine, sometimes they can cause up to 90% reduction in crop. And then another problematic thing is the grapes that are remaining have a lowered sugar content. So then you don't even have the same grapes that you should have. You can see spotted lanternfly likes to cluster together, so they can really mass attack some grapevines there. So what's the big deal other than reduced crops and reduced quality of those crops when they're remaining? These things are going to be a huge, huge nuisance. This is at the base of a tree infested with spotted lanternflies. You can actually see them on the bark there a little bit. All of that black stuff is sooty mold that is growing on the honeydew. These things put off copious amounts of honeydew. Just like aphids and some scales, it is a sticky, sweet excrement of some sucking insects. This picture on the right is the cover of a truck bed, and this person parked under a tree infested with spotted lanternfly for a short period of time, and you can see the mess that it caused. So they're going to be a huge, huge annoyance for people. They're also going to, put a damper on our backyard trend. This is a tree in someone's backyard just covered in spotted lanternfly. You can see all of the debris at the bottom, even this poor kid's car covered in spotted lanternfly. There's also been cases where spotted lanternflies have congregated on the door to a Chipotle and no one could go get their burritos. A big problem for me as a burrito lover. There's been instances where they've covered a mannequin in Target. People in the infested area like report it flying up their shirts. It's not one of those things that if you have ash trees, you know about emerald ash borer, or if you happen to be in interested in natural resources, you know about it. Everyone is going to know about spotted lanternfly when it gets here, and everyone is going to hate it. So aesthetic issues, but also the human annoyance factor is going to be huge. It's also going to be very problematic for the movement of goods. There is a quarantine associated with spotted lanternfly, and businesses operating within that quarantine have to have a spotted lanternfly permit to move inside and out of that quarantine zone. When it was identified very close to the North Carolina state line last fall, it caused a lot of stress and anxiety for Christmas tree growers. They were very concerned that they were going to be slapped with quarantine right before Christmas and wouldn't be able to move their trees outside of that quarantine zone. These are people's livelihoods. Like, this is going to impact a lot of people very, very directly. So very important that if we find it, we know about it as soon as we can. So hopefully the population is small enough that we can hopefully get it under control. This picture on the left right here is a tree covered in egg masses of the spotted lanternfly. This is another stage. It's similar to spongy moth. The females will lay their eggs on things that can easily be moved around. Sometimes trees, so if it's cut up and moved as firewood, but also a lot of RV equipment, vehicles, bricks and stone. We actually think it was originally introduced on a granite shipment, and that's how I got here in the first place. So what to look for? Look for those stages of insect, but also the egg mass. This is one of those things where it's really hard with Asian longhorn beetle. We're telling people things to look for on the tree and the one stage of beetle. All of the other stages are inside the tree. But this one changes its appearance so much. We have to teach people the different things to look for. This is what a covered egg mass looks like. A lot of people just think it looks like gray or silver silly putty on the side of a tree. And once they hatch, you can see the individual rows and individual eggs of the spotted lanternfly that hatched out. And again, report it to the same web or the same email, badbug@ncagr.gov. This goes to this is an email that is forwarded to several people within the plant industry division. So you can report any new invasive there. So what is North Carolina doing for spotted lanternfly? Well, they're doing statewide surveys. They're putting these circle traps. Basically, it takes advantage of the biological trait or the behavior of the insect as they migrate up a trunk. They get caught in that bag. So that's one way to survey for them. Unfortunately, though, it only works if you put the circle trap on a tree that's infested. They're looking at state parks, rest area, rail yards. They're doing visual inspections and just trying to these high risk areas for introductions. They're trying to keep an eye out and see if they can detect it early on. Hardscape is going back to that brick and that stone. Another thing we're doing, I mentioned the poolside pests before. This is a collaborative program. This is one of the stickers that you see there showing those two insects that we're trying to spread awareness about. They're both in neighboring states, one in Virginia, one in South Carolina. And for both of these, there are agencies, one state and one federal agency poised to respond if and when these insects are found in North Carolina. So you can go to that website there, poolsidepest.com, to learn more. Let me know if you want to do some kind of program and we can send you some magnets or stickers or anything as part of that. Well, some people ask us, why poolside pests? Well, we hope that it's catchier. Even though these insects can be found anywhere, they are attracted to water. They've been reported in dog bowls. There's a wonderful picture of a spotted lanternfly in someone's coffee, but they can be found in pool filters and pool skimmers, things like that. So we've partnered with pool companies statewide. So people who go in to buy chlorine tablets get one of these magnets dropped in their baggie on their way out. So just another way that we're trying to get the word out so we know about them sooner and we can hopefully be more successful. Another cool thing that North Carolina has is a detector dog team. So similar to those dogs that are trained to sniff out laurel wilt disease, We have 2 dogs in North Carolina that are trained to sniff out spotted lanternfly. This is Kita. She is the dog stationed in the east. Kita is brought to these hot spots, the rest areas, the campgrounds, things like that. But she's also brought anytime spotted lanternfly is reported. And we've had several reports in North Carolina. So Kita is brought out in the east. There's another dog stationed out in the west, and they go out and try to detect. They're much better at detecting spotted lanternfly than our eyesight, human eyesight is. So that's another way that we try to keep our eye out for this, this insect. And of course, I already mentioned these things are moving around. They get here on in or on infested material. So we're trying to spread the word not to move firewood. Get it when you get there. If you do go camping, the general rule of thumb that we're trying to share with people is to burn it within 50 miles of where a tree is cut. And hopefully that can cut down on all of this movement, and we don't further help these invasives move around. So with that, I'll leave you with a picture of my daughter. She is now almost 8 and won't let me dress her anymore. But when she did, I had her in a onesie that said, "Don't move firewood, it makes me cry." So hopefully that will convince people not to move firewood. With that, are there any questions?
Thank you, Kelly. That was excellent and so much good information, just what we need at this time. Back to your comment that they are attracted to water. So could folks expect to any body of water or a stream or a creek, all good places to keep our eyes open for spotted lanternfly?
Yeah, they really can be anywhere. I haven't heard reports of them attracted to more natural bodies of water, probably simply because that's not where people are interfacing with most of the time. But the biggest reports are from pools, skimmers and filters, and like bodies, things that are left out, bird baths and dog water bowls primarily.
So in some ways, some of the things we do to fight mosquitoes, dump out our dog bowls and our plant pots, we can.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's great.
Or they can be used as traps is the way.
That's right. There we go. There we go.
Your pool can be a bug trap. That people don't like to hear that.
I know. I had a question that I thought of, which is, could you describe for us what the quarantine zone means and what that means for people living inside and outside? Because that may come up as a question that the public asks. What does it mean that there's a quarantine zone?
Absolutely. It's kind of hard with Emerald Ash Borer. We had very discrete things that we could tell people were regulated materials. It was ash wood, firewood, and insecticide. Easy, short list. With spotted lanternfly, the list is so long that it's really hard to actually tell people. So what we're telling people is everything. Everything's regulated. What that means is businesses that are working in that zone. So in order to get that permit, they have to take a training. And part of that training means before they leave the quarantine area, they have to inspect their vehicle and their commodities for spotted lanternfly, and they have to spend a certain amount of time doing so. So then they're able to move the things out, and anyone moving in or out of those quarantine zones are supposed to do a self-inspection looking for these insects. And that's just to reduce on the amount of hitchhikers. We've had several incidences in North Carolina where single adults have been found. We have not found a reproducing population resulting from that yet, but frankly, it's probably just a matter of time.
Thank you. And also, how are the trees handled once they're removed? How do they, so say it's an emerald ash borer infestation, how do we handle those large removals? And, are there adults alive in there? And
yeah, so it kind of depends. With Asian longhorn beetle, for example, there's a very small quarantine zone. They actually chip those trees on site. If they move the chips, then they have to keep it within that small quarantine zone. But oftentimes they just leave the chips right there. With emerald ash borer, we're trying to recommend to people to not move it far. With urban trees, you want to move those trees off site, obviously. But we're hoping that it's disposed of locally where there's already an infestation and isn't moved. Unfortunately, that's how we think a lot of these things get around. Laurel wilt, the very first detection in North Carolina, was several counties into the state, and it was found right across the street from a log mill. So we think that it was hitchhiking on some woody material and fell off, and unfortunately there were host trees there. So Yeah, just trying to stay vigilant, doing the best we can to reduce it. Can we eliminate it? Probably not, but spreading the word is absolutely one of the best ways to reduce it.
Yes, thank you. Charlotte, I think you were going to ask something.
Yes, I'm mentioning spreading the word. So is there one like clearinghouse website or source of information you would recommend? I know USDA APHIS has some good information, but there's a lot of great information out there, but where's the best place to go?
So each one of these insects has its own website dedicated to it. And there is not one group, it's not USDA, APHIS has control over all of them, unfortunately. So for spotted lanternfly, for example, Stop SLF is the best website to go to. And then there's a EAB info website as well. It's a little bit hodgepodge, but each one does have a dedicated website to it.
And if we want to find out, like specifically in North Carolina, is like the Department of Agriculture, or if we're wanting to find the latest information about where these insects are in North Carolina, is it at NC State Department of Forestry? What's the best place to look?
Yeah. So that would probably be the North Carolina Forest Service or NC State Extension. I have a website that I manage, is the Forest Health page. I'll pull it up and drop it in the chat for you guys. And I link directly to the North Carolina Forest Service maps. They maintain, I used to be the one who maintained them. So once they fill that position, those maps will probably be updated. But still it's very fine scale and not just county by county. They're currently tracking walnut twig beetle, which I didn't talk about. It's only in one county in North Carolina and frankly hasn't moved around. We haven't found it in, I think, gosh, a decade at this point in North Carolina. But we're also tracking emerald ash borer and laurel. Once spotted lanternfly gets here, that will probably be another one that's tracked. So the North Carolina Forest Service, they have range maps. Also the NC State Extension website that I just mentioned. I will drop the page that I manage in the chat here. And you can see the invasive pest range map links are right there. And then I will link to the map that covers all of the species that we're concerned with in North Carolina that can be moved in or on firewood.
Excellent. I did have one last question for the Asian longhorn beetle. Are there any kind of native beetles or that we would confuse it with that look at all similar? Yeah, so the cottonwood borer is probably the one that looks most familiar or most similar, but it's not very common. I actually haven't seen one in the wild. I would love to, so I can have a side-by-side comparison example. But it is a longhorn beetle. It has much larger patches of white on it, and it does not have the banded antennae that Asian longhorn beetle does. And the other one that is probably confused with most is the white-spotted pine square. It is much smaller. It also is a longhorn beetle, so it has longhorn or long antennae. It has a white spot right at where the elytra come together, or those wing covers come together, and it's more grayish brown. It's not that shiny black, beautiful, stark contrast between the black and the white. It's more grayish with some white spots on it. Okay, great. That's great to know. Thanks. And Matt is dropping some similar beetles in it too. Perfect. Thank you, Matt.
Yeah, and we will compile these for the follow-up email, everyone. So not to worry, we'll grab those out of the chat and we'll compile some other of the resources that Kelly mentioned.
Oh, I just saw, can I answer this one question I did not mention, Serena, any treatments available for spotted lanternfly? Yes, they're actually pretty susceptible to most pesticides. What the plan is, what they're doing in other infested areas, and the plan for North Carolina is if it's found, if it's a small population, they're going to try to eradicate it if possible. If it's a larger population, the plan is to kill with herbicide all tree of heaven in the area under 6 inches. And then if the tree of heaven is larger than 6 inches, they're going to treat those as trap trees, treat them with an insecticide so that when spotted lanternfly is attracted to those larger trees and feed on it, then they'll die. So that's the plan for removal or management.
Excellent, thank you. One other question came in about pine bark beetles. Do you have any comments on them right now?
Yeah. So we actually haven't had, there's, several species in North Carolina. Southern pine beetle is of the biggest concern because it's, the worst pest of pine forest. Well, we haven't had an outbreak in North Carolina since the early 2000s in the western part of the state. In 2017 and 2018, we had a few spots, but those have all died down. Last year, we didn't have a single southern pine beetle spot reported. The closest one was in Francis Marion National Forest in South Carolina. This is one of those insects where usually they only take out those weakened, stressed, or dying trees, and we haven't seen a spot develop that takes out those healthy trees in 20 years at this point. So that's very good news. It means our forest management is working. We're recommending to landowners to take advantage of the cost share program. There's a Southern Pine Beetle Prevention Program available where they can do a pre-commercial thin or some understory competition control in order to make their stands healthier and therefore more resistant to bark beetle attack. Now, if you have one of the bark beetles, the Ips, engraver beetles, or black turpentine beetles, usually that means something else is going on with the tree because those are secondary pests that are attacking trees that are stressed or weakened or dying. So then that would be what we would recommend to people is identify that underlying cause and try to solve that.
Thank you. It is good to have a little good news, though,
Yeah,
among all of it, right? Wonderful. All right, Kelly, I want to thank you again for your time today, your wonderful presentation. I know many of us will be reviewing that again and again to keep us fresh on all of those pests. And we will again share a group of resources with you all in the follow-up email.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. All right, that brings us over to our Be on the Lookout section for this month and the month ahead. Today, as I mentioned, we have a recording of Mike. So I'm going to start his, we'll play that, and then we will turn it over to Matt. Here we go.
Good morning, everyone. It's actually afternoon for me. I'm unable to be with you on Tuesday morning, but this is Monday afternoon, and I hope this recording finds you well. I will be talking about, this is Mike, and I'm going to be doing our Be on the Lookouts for diseases in the garden for the months, what's left of May and for the month of June. And remember, this is just the appetizer. If you want more on the way of Be on the Lookouts, our website has the whole set of lists, 12 lists month by month that you can find by going to the menu banner on the left-hand side of the screen, and toward the bottom you'll see there the link for the BOLOs.
Excuse me, everyone. I'm going to pause Mike for just a minute and try to improve the sound. So hold on. I think I could make the sound better. Okay.
About a couple of molds, or things that go by the common name mold, and in this case because it's time to see them, and with the additional rainfall we've been getting, I think that we'll be seeing more of them. Let me start out with our sooty molds, which are of course true molds, true fungi, and they are growing on normally it's on insect honeydew, so exudates from insects feeding either on that particular plant or on one of the overstory trees and dripping down, and then those exudates are colonized by the secondary mold fungi, which can be rubbed off with firm pressure between the thumb and forefinger, showing that the tissue underneath is green and healthy. So these are not infecting the leaf, they're not causing direct damage except for intercepting a little bit of the sunlight there. The other molds that we think about often this time of year are the slime molds, which aren't actually true fungi at all. They're completely unrelated. A very interesting life cycle if you have the opportunity to look that up. And the most common one that we will be seeing, in fact, I saw a kind of dried up one just yesterday, was the Fuligo septica, known as the dog vomit slime mold, because in an early stage it has a frothy yellow, unpleasant look to it. But it is also harmless. Some people are allergic to the spores, but this causes really no harm to the plants or to people or to pets, but very common and causes occasional consternation among those who encounter it and are not aware of what it is. I wanted to talk about also something that I've never brought up on plants, pests, and pathogens, just because we don't really see it in the home landscape. It's a fairly well-known disease. I think that maybe what is shown in this photograph here, although it's not completely confirmed yet, and I have the question here, is it ascochyta blight? Is it clematis wilt? But that's actually the same question, because those are two diseases or two manifestations of the same pathogen. It starts out infecting leaves or petioles, and you can on the leaves get these dark necrotic or dead blotches, sometimes with the concentric patterns in them. But if the fungus moves down into the vine, the clematis vine itself, you can get the wilting, which is seen in the other photograph. And at that stage, it's known as clematis wilt. Here's a photograph from several years ago of a confirmed case from a nursery of clematis wilt. And you may wonder, why is it called ascochyta blight? And that's just one of the earlier names that the fungus went by. It's now called Caliphoma clematidina. But again, it's the same fungus that's causing the problem in both cases. More familiar and something you're more likely to encounter would be powdery mildews. Monarda, Coreopsis, Zinnia, there are several plants in the flower bed that are going to be quite susceptible. And also, of course, there are several of our shrubs, but in the interest of brevity here, I am not going into the tree and shrub bolos here. I am going to mention a few, though, from the flower bed. In addition to powdery mildew, there's daylily leaf streak, which is specific to daylily and causes this first yellow and then dead area to move from the leaf tip down along the midrib. So that's kind of a classic symptom of daylily leaf streak, which is a fungal disease. You may also see, especially in that background leaf there, some of the tracks of the daylily leaf miner, which would be one of Matt's areas of expertise. When you see plants wilting, you want to check the roots, you want to check the base of the main stem, and in some cases you will find root knot nematode. The galling here is quite large and easy to diagnose on some of the highly susceptible plants such as impatiens and begonia, but that is only a very short list of plants that are susceptible to infection by root knot nematode. Septoria leaf spot on Rudbeckia. This photograph is just from a couple of days ago here on campus. On the lower leaves, dark spots tend to be angular, so you might think, oh, is it downy mildew, for example? But in this case, it turned out to be Septoria. And this is going to be not the same Septoria that I'll mention in a moment when we're talking about the vegetable garden. The spotting here can get quite extensive by later in the season. And finally, and this of course is not a flower, but I don't really have anywhere else to put it, Japanese holly fern mottle virus, you might want to be on the lookout for that as well. It's probably been around in the state for a couple of years. We've seen symptoms that certainly look like it. In fact, there's a plant just outside the building here. It can be variable, but different chlorotic or yellow patterns on the leaves. You may see ring spots. In this particular case, where it was officially confirmed now for the first time in the state, it came from a nursery, and some of the leaves were almost entirely yellow, just with a few little angular green areas left in them. So symptoms can be variable, but apparently there is an issue this year with Japanese holly fern mottle virus in Sertomium, Japanese holly fern, in the industry. So something to be on the lookout for. As far as I know, the only other species that it's reported in is leatherleaf fern, which would be something that's produced commercially for flower arrangements. So I'm not really aware of it being used as a landscape plant, but Sertomium is. Among fruits, this is a photograph of a mosaic and deformation on a leaf of a fig tree, also very close here on campus. Just took this picture today. And what we're seeing here is fig mosaic, which has some commonality with rosette virus. It's not the same virus, but it is likewise transmitted by mites. Although I'm not 100% sure that this is known to be only one virus that can cause this. But you will see some leaf symptoms. You may see some fruit symptoms as well, some fruit deformation. Generally not a major issue, but one thing to be aware of if you're propagating from your figs, that you're going to also propagate the virus if it's infected. Peach trees in the home orchard, scab, of course, which is going to be visible early in the developing fruit. And because the scabbed areas don't expand as the fruit is trying to, you can get cracking. And you may, as the fruit ripens, see brown rot, which is a much softer and larger area of decay on the fruit itself. With apples, fire blight, probably getting toward the end of our season of concern for fire blight. Cedar apple rust should be coming in strong right about now and into early June on the apples. And Marsanina leaf blotch, I think I mentioned on the program previously. There's a photograph there in the lower right, as well as frog eye leaf spot, things that you could be on the lookout for on apples. And of course, with any kind of our home fruit orchards, you want to make sure that you're staying up on your fungicide, your preventive fungicide programs. Finally, with blueberry, there may be some exobasidium leaf spot caused by the fungus Exobasidium maculosum. And this is an interesting one where the spots are very light in color at first, very light yellow on the upper surface, almost white on the underside. Now this, of course, will mature to a darker spot as that tissue dies. And I'm not really aware of any particular recommendations for dealing with this particular disease, but it's something to be on the lookout for. In the vegetable garden with tomatoes, things should still be looking pretty good here, but as we now get into the hotter and wetter period, we'll be seeing more problems. Blossom end rot, especially on those first clusters of fruit, not a disease, of course, but the lack of calcium getting to the developing fruit. You see an early stage of it there in the photograph in the upper right. Some leaf spots, two of the most common being Septoria leaf spot, shown in the photograph here in the upper left. And that one is going to be appearing first on the lowest foliage and working its way up the plant. Whereas the spotting that you get with tomato spotted wilt virus in this other photograph here is going to be found even on the youngest foliage, since it's systemic in the plant. And this particular virus is transmitted by thrips. Less likely, but still possible, would be bacterial leaf spot. And that would be another one that would be more common on the lower, older foliage and move up. Tomato plants that are wilting need to consider a number of possibilities, including root knot nematode, RKN there, the abbreviation, southern bacterial wilt, and southern blight, which is a fungal disease where the base of the main stem decays. So always look again at the roots and at the lower stem when you see wilting. Herbicide injury, and we've had some inquiries about that on tomato lately as well. In the cucurbits, we never know from year to year when we're going to have the first arrival of downy mildew. This is something you especially want to be aware of on cucumber. The initial symptoms are angular chlorotic or yellow spots. At least they're angular on cucumber, which is the main host that you would see it on. Those spots do eventually die. And before they do, you may, in humid weather, see the dark spoilation on the underside of the leaf, especially if you look with a hand lens. Very different from powdery mildew, which most people are familiar with, the more whitish powdery colored spoilation and growth of the fungus. And that's going to be more common, though, on your squashes and pumpkins, especially as we move on later in the growing season. And cucurbits, as many plants are susceptible to root knot nematodes. So again, consider that possibility if you start to see wilting. And the wilting may be temporary at first. You may have wilting during the heat of the day, and then the plant appears to recover when the heat is less intense, but that will eventually become an irreversible wilting. And I would be remiss in not mentioning downy mildew of basil, and just say briefly that you get the yellowish blotchiness there to the upper surface of the leaf and some of that dark sporulation on the underside. And actually, Charlotte is going to be talking a little bit about this herself in the program today. Finally, our turf grass BOLOs for June. Brown patch is going to be, as we get hot, humid weather, really favorable for the Rhizoctonia that causes this disease, the fungus that causes brown patch. And at the same time, we've got the weather unfavorable for the tall fescue, the cool season grasses that are going to be susceptible to this disease. The interesting photograph here is from several years ago out in front of Kilgore Hall, where I think I believe it was tall fescue strips and then zoysia strips in between them, which is not going to have that particular disease of brown patch. So you can see how the season and the preference of the host is really important. In what season is it stressed? That's when you're going to likely see the disease. Dollar spot is something that you could see as well in the coming month, and in any month of the year you may see a fairy ring, either the green ring shown here or dead arcs or rings in the turf, and sometimes you may even see the mushrooms or puffballs that are developed there around the ring. With that, I wish I could ask if there are any questions, and if there are any, you can ask Matt, and if he wants to defer them to me, then I'm sure that he can pass those along, and then I'll get back to folks via email. So with that, I wish you a good rest of the Plants, Pests, and Pathogens program today.
And we thank you, Mike, from afar. That was excellent. And I will just put it back to that screen for a minute. Matt, I don't see anything pressing in the chat. Charlotte has been helping out with some fact sheets. So if you agree, I will stop the share.
Sure thing. Can you hear me well?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Yes, and yeah, it might be good to just email Mike with any questions you have for this from his BOLOs, or just general questions you have. And now I will share my June BOLOs. Okay, so we're gonna go. I'm gonna try and go through this quickly. So so Charlotte has enough time to talk about a little bit about plants, but you know, June is a really active time of year. We get a lot of samples in June, and there's going to be a lot of critters out there for me to cover. But a couple of specifics: there's going to be lots of young caterpillars. For instance, the bagworms are starting to hatch out of the bags, out of their mother's bags, making their own little bags. And you can see just on this little section of arborvitae, there were something like 30 or so little tiny bagworms. So if you have plants that are infested year after year, take a look for these little tiny caterpillars, smack some branches onto some sheets or some paper, look for them. That's the best time to treat because the small ones are most susceptible. Same with the webworms. The fall webworms are not only present in the fall, they're actually present in summer and late summer, and they're usually not noticed until late summer anyway. But right now, or starting soon, you may start to see little patches of these silken nests forming with these little tiny hairy caterpillars, and that's fall webworms. Those at this time of year, they're small enough that you could probably just prune out that little twig that has them, destroy that material, and you've got control for that group of caterpillars. There are going to be sawflies as well as caterpillars coming out. These are some elm sawflies feeding on the leaves of an elm, obviously, but you're going to have a lot of those. Again, note that sawfly larvae are different from caterpillars in that they have 6 or more pairs of prolegs and a single eye lens on their head. Of course, Japanese beetles, everybody's favorite scarab, although beautiful and probably brought in with probably the cherry blossom soil, as Kelly Oten was describing back in 1916. They're going to be out and about basically in June or so when it starts warming up, June through about mid-August. The adults will feed on lots of different plants, especially roses and grapes, but keep an eye out for them. Note the beetle bags don't work except for to attract them to your yard. But you know, beetles, if you find them, they can be knocked into a bucket of soapy water. They do drop to the ground when you whack them anyway. So you might as well just grab them, throw them in a bucket of soapy water if you want to get rid of them. Otherwise, they'll be gone after a couple months, and you won't see their activity anymore. Lots of true bugs are going to be out, the sucking insects, lace bugs. For instance, this is an eggplant lace bug, but there's lots of other ornamental plants that get lace bugs, and garden flea hoppers and such are going to be out, as well as leaf hoppers, which are going to be affecting your oregano, rosemary, thyme, all the mints and kind of those herbs and stuff. The garden flea hoppers over here are these small black bugs that hop and will leave dark fecal specks, but also little white specks where they suck the green out of plants. And these are often found in gardens on vegetables and other green leaf plants. Now the carpenter bee activity is done. You may have some large flies flying around emerging from the carpenter bee nests. These are parasitic tiger bee flies. So you may start seeing them around. They are harmless to humans. They can't sting or bite. And they are a little bit of biological control against carpenter bees, which I know some people really do not like. Obviously, if they're chewing in your wood, this was from my deck a few years ago. Obviously, if those carpenter bees are chewing in your wood, you're really not happy. So these are good guys then. These are the ones going and eating some of those carpenter bees. As far as blood-sucking pests, there's going to be a lot of activity now starting. Get rid of the water in your containers at home to keep mosquitoes from breeding in there. Not shown here are the tiger mosquitoes, which are very abundant during the day, very small, aggressive biters. But in other environments, you're going to find other species. And of course, look out for ticks and chiggers. They're going to be active right now. The best way to prevent them is to be careful where you're walking. Walking in high grass is where they're going to be mostly standing on the ends and questing. They stick out their front legs to smell for you and basically grab onto you and crawl around until they find a spot to sink their mouth parts in. But one of the best ways also is to, if you're outdoors a lot and you're getting tick bites or chigger bites, things like that, is to treat your clothing and shoes with permethrin. That is not to be applied to the skin, but you can apply it to clothing. You can wash it a few times before having to reapply. But permethrin is a really good, effective chemical that will kill ticks and chiggers on contact. And unfortunately, I don't have anything else specific because just about everything else is going to be waking up and active in June. Everything from these fungus feeding moths to these lizard beetles and everything in between. So I will, though I have a couple more slides real quick, but you're just going to see a lot of things out there, of course. It's North Carolina in June, so everything's active. But one of the things you probably will not see, and hopefully will not see, are giant hornets, the murder hornets people are talking about. So I have been getting lots and lots and lots of calls and emails about suspected giant hornets. Now we do have a giant hornet in the state and a couple other wasps that are similar. And so we do have, and almost all of what's being sent to me are queen or very new worker European hornets. These look very similar and superficially and are a very close relative to giant hornets. But the giant hornets are still only in the Pacific Northwest, and they're seeing very few of them now. So I don't think that there's any concern in North Carolina in the near future, if at all. And to tell the difference between them, there are a couple of different really quick characters. If you see any reddish brown on the head, it is not a giant hornet. Giant hornets have a completely yellow head. So if you see any tinging of brownish red on the head, it's going to be European hornet, along with any of these little teardrops or spots coming off of the stripes. The stripes on giant hornets are very clean and straight and distinct. Also, at the end of June, typically around July and August is when we see them in time with the cicadas, are going to be the cicada killers. So I wouldn't see that. You probably won't see them now. It's going to be probably at least a month before you start seeing them. And late June is really the earliest we see them because again, once you start hearing the cicadas out in the trees, that's when they're going to be active because that's when their prey. That's what their prey is. They look fairly similar, although they have very large eyes that are not notched. If we go back to this, hornet eyes are notched. They look like little kidney bean shaped. But their eyes are round. They have a number of other characteristics, especially the abdomen is pointy and almost all black, except for some faint pale yellow blotches. So keep an eye out for them. Know your European hornet from your giant hornet, and know that size is not a good indicator of that it's a giant hornet because European hornets are almost as big, if not a little bit bigger sometimes. So look for those characteristics, help train others, and enjoy the nice weather. Hopefully it's not too hot soon, but enjoy the weather and the gardening and all that stuff.
Thank you, Matt. Yes, Minda was just good enough to put your comparison of the Asian hornet versus the European hornet in the chat, which I think you maybe first distributed last year or maybe even 2 years ago now, maybe longer.
Yeah, May of 2020 was when the big story came out. 2019, end of 2019 is when they first found them up in Canada and Washington State. So, yeah, but from what I've heard, there are very few being seen even there. So and even if they were to establish there, I have my doubts that they'd ever come here. My reasoning is, for instance, the European hornet has been in the US for over 150 years. It is not even in Wisconsin or Nebraska yet. So it is, I doubt that we'll ever see them here if they were to establish there. They would, unless there was a separate introduction, we're not going to see them.
It's nice to see that some things are not raging towards us, right? All right. I do not see any other questions, but I know you'll keep an eye on that, Matt, as we get Charlotte started with Plant These Instead.
All right, thank you, Caroline. Okay, as Mike mentioned briefly in his update on be on the lookout for plant pathogens, he mentioned basal downy mildew, which is a fungal-like pathogen that infects basil. And Genovese basil, or Genovese basil, is one of the hosts that we love to grow for culinary purposes. It's like the favorite basil to grow to use in all your recipes, but it's also extremely susceptible to basal downy mildew. So today we're going to talk about some cultivars of basil you can plant instead of Genovese that have been bred to be resistant. And I do want to emphasize that resistant does not mean immune. So it's not absolutely impossible for the resistant varieties to develop basal downy mildew, but if they do, it should be probably a little later in the season and maybe not as severe of a case. But they're going to give you your best shots for avoiding this disease, which I should also mention usually infects in midsummer. So we haven't quite started seeing it yet that I know of. And for home gardeners particularly, there's no effective treatment. So once this really starts to show up on your basil plants, you can't do much, about it other than pull the plants up. And when it starts to show up on the plant, you can see this picture up in the top. The leaves just look really, unhealthy. They might get yellow spots. They might start to get brown or necrotic areas on them. And it just kind of progresses up the plant and it starts to look worse and worse. And whenever you see something like this, always turn the leaf over on basil and look for this black sporulation. And that's really telling that you have basal downy mildew. And there are other downy mildews that infect other plants, but the basal downy mildew is pretty limited to basil and some of its close relatives, such as coleus. And with basal downy mildew, like other downy mildews, most of them don't overwinter here in North Carolina. They actually blow up to us, or especially with basal downy mildew, it blows up to us on air currents from further south. So it doesn't overwinter in our plants and gardens outdoors, but the spores travel to us on these warm, humid winds that come up from the south in the summer. So this type of weather pattern we're in now would be ideal for spreading basal downy mildew. So what varieties can you plant that are less likely to develop this disease? There's a couple of series out there that you're most likely to find. One was developed and released by Rutgers University, and they all have this Rutgers name. And then they all have these very cologne and perfume sounding names. So there is the Rutgers Passion, Rutgers Devotion, Rutgers Obsession, and Rutgers Thunderstruck. The DMR after the name does indicate downy mildew resistance. So when you see that listed after the basal cultivar, it's typically indicating downy mildew resistance. And you can see some images over here on the right side of the screen of some of these different basal varieties. And you're like, well, they just look like basil. They do look like pretty typical sweet basil, which is what they are. So when you're purchasing the plants, unless they're specifically labeled, so the variety, you're not going to be able to tell just by looking at it. And I have noticed a lot of garden centers now, especially more the big box stores, they just sell sweet basil. It's just generic. They don't tell you the cultivar name. So, you could be getting some of these cultivars and not knowing it. The only way to absolutely know you're getting it is to see that it's labeled specifically as one of these. So the Rutgers varieties, I will mention the one that's a little bit distinct is Thunderstruck. It has like a kind of a scalloped edge and kind of a different leaf texture. It's the only one that looks a little bit distinct. The other series is called Prospera, and it was out of a breeding program out of Israel. And the Prospera, the original one was just Prospera, and now they've come out with a few kind of variations on it. One is a compact plant, a more compact, that's sold as Prospera Compact DMR, and then a larger leaf one that's Prospera Italian Large Leaf DMR. Again, the DMR meaning downy mildew resistant. So definitely be on the lookout for these plants. It's wonderful, perfect time to plant basil. Basil loves warm weather, humid weather, warmer nights. It's very sensitive to frost. We should be done with frost, hopefully all across North Carolina, and we're getting into this weather pattern where will just establish and grow very quickly. But if you aren't finding plants that are specifically labeled as some of these cultivars, I encourage you to think about growing basil from seed. It is very easy to grow from seed and very quick. And typically with basil, especially if you're going to be harvesting a lot for pesto and for doing things like that where you'll need a lot of basil, you might want to do a couple of sowings through the course of the summer. So you always have a fresh crop coming on to get lots of nice new leaves and get the leaves before the plants start flowering as well. When they start flowering, that can affect the flavor of the leaves, but it is always good to let some of your basil flower because bees, honeybees especially, love basil. So look out for the seed in seed catalogs. When you order basil, you're always going to know the cultivar that you're ordering. So look out for some of these names if you are ordering seeds. And so, there's a question, it's like, well, there's all these different varieties that are bred to be resistant to basal downy mildew, but which one's best? Which one should I look for? And so that's something that we're actually trying to figure out. We have Master Gardener volunteers and extension agents all across North Carolina, and at least 20 different counties are working to answer this question by hosting a variety trial this summer. And you can see a picture kind of here that shows some of the different basil varieties in a plot. And this variety trial will rate the plants on their disease resistance. So our Master Gardener volunteers will be checking these plants every week for the development of disease symptoms. We'll also be asking questions about garden performance. So just, as a plant in a home garden or a community garden, how did this grow? Was it a good plant for that type of purpose? Because a lot of times when these studies are done, it's more for commercial production. And how did it grow in a field where we're going to go through and harvest everything at once. So we're asking more questions about how did it grow for a home garden, community garden setting. And then taste preference, right? Because you could grow it if you can grow it, but it doesn't taste like basil, not much good. So we're going to be asking about taste preferences as well, and sharing all of this information with you about what we find with these basil varieties. We will have updates posted on the public EMGV portal, so encourage you to look there. We'll also be posting some updates on our NC Extension Master Gardener Volunteers Facebook page through the summer. And we have an article that last year we ran a small pilot of this project. So we've got an article about that just talks a little bit more about how the project works, and we'll share that in the follow-up email. So we really encourage you to stay tuned to hear more, and we will share the results as well later in the season here on Plants, Pests, and Pathogens, and also on the Plant Toolbox. So there are many, many different herbs among the thousands of plants listed on the Plant Toolbox, and sweet basil is one of them. If you go to the website, already are listed several cultivars and of basil, and indicates which ones are resistant to basil downy mildew. So always a good first stop when you're researching a plant and want to learn more about it is plants.ces.nzsu.edu, the Plant Toolbox. And these slides are available at our Plant These Instead archive. And when you look at the slides and anything that's underlined in that blue color, it is a link. So when you click on it, it'll open up, if it's referring to a fact sheet, or all of the plant names are linked back to the Plant Toolbox. So when you click on any of the plant names that are in the slide archive, it'll take you to that fact sheet or that information page on that plant in the Plant Toolbox. It's a great resource to go back and learn more. And we will close out today with just a few announcements from the Extension Master Gardener program statewide. Upcoming things to mark on your calendar. We have a continuing education webinar on June 7th, and this will be the Check Your Dirt tool, which is a wonderful resource that was created in partnership with NC State Extension and Duke University, and it helps you determine potential contaminants in your soil and best practices to minimize the impact of those contaminants. So the webinar will tell you about what these contaminants could be, how they can get in your soil, and some strategies for how to deal with them. Understanding Plants, an Introduction to Botany is one of the online Extension Gardener courses that will start June 6th. It is self-paced, and if you want to have a refresher for botany, get a real feel for the terminology and what it means and how plants grow, strongly encourage this course. It's also a good foundation for plant identification, because a lot of plant identification is keying out those characteristics of the plant, which have a lot of taxonomy and terminology associated with them. So this will give you a good grounding in all of those terms. So I encourage you to check that out and go ahead and register. There is a discount for Extension Master Gardener volunteers and volunteers for the J.C. Ralston Arboretum. Want you all to save the date, October 27th through 29th. This is when our Extension Master Gardener College will be held. It'll be on NC State's Centennial Campus, which is in Raleigh, at the Hunt Library, which you see pictured here. And our focus will be about climate change and gardening in a changing climate. So we will have different sessions and speakers and tours and workshops to help you learn about how climate change is affecting plants and how we can adapt to that and hopefully mitigate some of those impacts. And really want to focus on some tools and resources that you can take back to your county after the conference and share with other people and help teach other people about how to adapt and mitigate climate change, especially when it comes to gardening and plants. Of course, the J.C. Ralston Arboretum always has an exciting lineup of events that you can find on their calendar. It includes both in-person events and online events that they host every month, such as their Midweek with Mark webinar, which is typically the second Wednesday at 3. So I encourage you to check out the great things that they have offered. J.C. Ralston Arboretum, of course, in Raleigh, and is part of NC State University. So if you're ever in Raleigh, encourage you to visit. And I think last month we mentioned our garden help directory, which is set up more for the public. So this is where you can refer, you can use this link and share it with anybody to say, well, if you're looking for who to contact in your county, if you have gardening questions, go to the garden help directory. And so if Master Gardener volunteers have an email set up directly for the public to submit gardening questions, you can find it there. You know, if it's the agent who you would contact directly, that's listed. And one thing we're really trying to add to the site now, our website. So we already have every extension, county extension site there, but we're looking for social media sites for the Extension Master Gardener program, or blogs or websites that your group may have as a resource for the public. So these should be websites that are set up to educate the public about home gardening as that you're setting up as Master Gardener volunteers. So we want to make sure all of those are represented on the site. So if you have that type of website or Facebook page or Instagram account for your Master Gardener group in your county, you can drop that in the chat now, or you can email us at ncemgprogram@ncsu.edu, and we'll make sure to get it posted onto the site. So we definitely want to make sure we're connecting people with all the resources that are out there. And just to finish off, some looking ahead of what's coming up with plants, pests, and pathogens for the rest of the season. Next month, we'll be looking at diseases and pest issues on tomatoes. In July, we have small-scale stormwater solutions, and our guest speaker will be Mitch Woodward. In August, we will be featuring your images. So go ahead and start taking pictures if you see insects or you see strange things happening with your plants that you would like for Matt and Mike to take a look at in August and diagnose. Start taking those pictures now. We'll be sharing more information this summer about how to post them and share them. In September, we're going to hear about climate change mitigation for gardeners and homeowners. And then in October, I definitely want to mention we have changed the date slightly so that we are not holding plants, pests, and pathogens the same week as Extension Master Gardener College. So be sure to mark your calendar that October, which will be our last plants, pests, pathogens for the season, will actually be October 18th. So we'll be a week earlier, and we'll be wrapping up with pest and plant disease issues. Of course, you can sign up for all of these on the EMG Internet calendar. If you sign up, it'll create a education hour report for you that you can submit, and you can see all the details about the upcoming schedule from the EMG Internet calendar as well. Okay, so we look forward to seeing everybody back next month, June 28th. Again, we will be featuring Matt and Mike and talking about pest and plant disease issues of tomatoes. You can check out the recordings from Plants, Pests, and Pathogens up through 2021 are posted on YouTube. And from our current season, they are available to Master Gardener volunteers on the Extension Master Gardener intranet site. And we hope to see you soon. Wish everybody great gardening until then. Thank you.
All right, I'll play our outgoing.